Hello everyone, welcome back. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about writing off the national debt. Okay, it's time to just write it off, get it off the books, because it is just a bunch of bullshit. Okay, and Senate Republicans are really making a big deal out of it as far as passing Trump's big, beautiful bill because they're saying that the national debt's going to go up by some, I don't know, $4 or $5 trillion. So let's back up. Let's put this thing into perspective with this national debt and what it's doing. So every 3 months, okay, the interest on the national debt, which the last time I looked at it was about $35 trillion. It's now probably up to 36 or $37 trillion. Every 3 months, okay, it goes up by $1 trillion because of the interest. Okay, so it's like if you got this gigantic credit card bill, and the credit card company's charging you $1,000 a month just in interest, right? And then between paying that $1,000 in interest, paying your rent, paying your other bills, like you can barely make ends meet. So given that the interest is so high, you have no chance of ever actually paying it off. Okay, so right now, every 3 months, the interest charge is $1 trillion. So the national, and now they can't even pay it. So the national debt goes up by another $1 trillion. And because this national debt is continually compounding, right? Eventually, it's going to be every 2 months. It's going to be $1 trillion, and then eventually every month, the interest on the debt's going to be $1 trillion, and eventually it'll be like every 2 weeks they're charging $1 trillion. So we got to step back for a second and say, okay, fine. Right now you got $1 trillion that's being charged every 3 months. Who's benefiting from this, right? Who's getting this $1 trillion? Okay, so let's stop and think what the number trillion means. Okay, the number trillion is an astronomical number. If I tell you 1,000,000 seconds, that's about a week. Okay, if I tell you 1,000,000,000 seconds, that's 31 years. Okay, so huge jump there. If I tell you 1,000,000,000,000 seconds, 1,000,000,000,000 seconds is 31,000 years. Okay, so that's an astronomical number. We shouldn't even be talking in trillions unless we're talking about like molecules, or grains of sand or stars. The number trillion is an astronomical number. If you took $100 bills and you tried to stack them on top of each other, I mean, you would go into orbit, right? You would reach outer space with that. So it is a huge number. When they keep calling this, part of the problem here is that they're calling debt, this national debt, okay? And people think that we actually owe this to somebody. The number trillion is so big that there's nobody to lend $1 trillion to the government. Okay, it's just such a big number. So right there, that tells you that get rid of this word debt and substitute something else. And the word that we're going to substitute for debt is what it really is, which is money dilution. Okay, so every time the government basically raises the debt ceiling, right, what they're doing is they are printing up money electronically, and they are diluting the existing money. Okay, so it's just like if you got a pie, right, and you cut it in half, right? Well, now you got two pieces. You still have the same amount of material. You have one pie. Well, now let's say you cut that into quarter pieces, right? Right, you got 4 pieces, but you've got the same amount of material. You can cut it into eighths. You can continue to subdivide it almost infinitely, right? You can keep subdividing this pie all the way down to its molecules, right? And then go beyond that and start dividing up those molecules into atoms. Okay, so you can keep dividing this pie up into little tiny pieces for a very, very long time. So that's exactly what they're doing with the existing money. They're continually printing up more money electronically. Okay, and what they're doing is, as they print up this money, they don't want to just say that, hey, we're just creating money out of thin air. So what they're doing is they're creating this concept of debt, okay, which kind of worked to fool the world, right? When when it was a small part of when it was relatively small compared to the GDP. Um, but now it's gotten so big that anybody that knows anything about money looks at it and says this is an insane number. Okay, so let's put this into perspective again. The interest charge on the national debt it goes up by $1 trillion every 3 months. Okay, so that means that every year, right now, it's going up by $4 trillion. Okay, so that's the interest on the national debt. So the total revenues of the U.S. government, the amount of money that it brings in from all the taxes, everything, all the revenue that the federal government brings in, is $6 trillion. Okay, so you got $6 trillion. Four of that is this. It is just the interest on this national debt. I think 2 trillion of it is like the Social Security and Medicaid payments that they they pay out. National defense is, I think, a little bit less than $1 trillion. So it doesn't leave a whole bunch of room for anything else. So when you look at this in perspective, when you put this in perspective, and you say, hey, the interest on this national debt is $4 trillion. Total revenues are $6 trillion. There's absolutely no way it could ever be paid back. Okay, so the solution is to just write it off the books. Okay, so now the question becomes, well, if you write it off the books, aren't the debtors going to be hurt? So the question now becomes, who are the debtors? Who do we owe this $35 to $36 trillion to? Again, an astronomical number. 1 trillion seconds is 31,000 years. So we owe 36 times that to somebody. Who is this person? Who is this group of people that we owe that amount of money to? Okay. Now, if you talk to economists, they'll give you some book answer, and they'll say, well, the government takes this debt and they package it into like bonds and into debt, and they sell it to the banks, and then basically all the banks are owners of the Federal Reserve, or they're going to give you so who do we owe this money to? The bankers? Fuck the bankers, okay? Another answer that people will sometimes tell you is, well, this debt is actually owed to the American people, so that each American is a debtor, right? And at the same time is a debtee. So basically, each person owes this money, right? Or a portion of this money, but at the same time, they are also owed this money, okay? So basically, we owe this debt to ourselves. Bullshit, just write it off. I mean, it's not like we're ever actually going to receive this money, okay? So again, write it off. It's a bullshit number it's basically a balance sheet item, right? Because what's happening is the government's printing up this money. It looks really bad if they're just saying that, hey, we're printing this money out of thin air. So they basically have this balance sheet item where they're putting it there and they're saying, hey, this is somehow, some way going to be paid back in the future, okay? And this kind of made sense, like way back when it was, just a few $1 billion, right? Like maybe back in the 1980s, early 1980s, it was a few $1 billion. Once it got up to $1 trillion, just forget about the 35, 36 trillion dollars that's at now. Once it got up to $1 trillion, people looked at it and said, people that understand money and understand numbers and saying, wait a second, the number trillion is a tremendous number, right? $1 trillion. A trillion seconds, again, is 31,000 years. Who do we owe this money to, right? So people started realizing that this is a balance sheet item, okay? And the reason why they keep it there is because it kind of looks bad for the government to basically come out and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, you're right. We have been diluting the money all along. Now, the issue with diluting the money, right, is essentially the taxing you, okay? Because what happens is anytime the government just prints up more money, what they're doing is they're reducing the buying power of your savings, right? Of the money that you're making and your savings. So as they print up more money, we see it in terms of prices going up, right? So we see the inflation, okay? So essentially, anytime the government reduces the buying power of your money, they have taxed you, okay? So the government has taxed us, right, to the tune of some $36 trillion without telling us that they've taxed us, because they've done it through money dilution, okay? Now, the reason why the government can get away with it, or has been kind of able to get away with it, is because they don't just tax us, right, the American citizens. They're actually taxing the entire world, okay? Because the dollar, since I think World War I, right, is basically an international currency. So all the major banks around the world hold U.S. dollars in their reserves. International transactions are done in U.S. dollars, right? So all countries around the world have to hold U.S. dollars. So when the government dilutes the money, right, they're not just taxing us, they're taxing the entire world, okay? And that is the reason why the United States can afford, I don't know, whatever, 20 aircraft carriers, right? And no other country in the world can do it, because no other country in the world has the ability to tax the entire world. Because the United States has the world's currency reserve, they're able to tax the entire world, which is fine. You know, if that's how they're going to do it, fine, tax the world through money dilution, but don't double tax us through income taxes and you know, all these other taxes that they keep getting. You know, I'm perfectly okay with, you know what, tax the rest of the world. You know, I'm okay if they keep printing the money, right? But drop this bullshit about future generations paying it back, because future generations are not going to pay it back. Okay, we're paying for it now through money dilution, right? It is a tax now. Money dilution is a current tax, because they're reducing the buying power of our money. Okay, so they need to just come out and just say what it is, okay, and get this debate off the table. Get this bullshit discussion off the table of how a few future generations going to pay for it, because they're just, you know, they're just clouding shit up there. They're actually teaching this stuff in school, and it's confusing the shit out of people, where it doesn't make sense. Okay, once you wrap your head around how big the number trillion is, you'll realize that it can never be paid back. Okay, so now that I kind of got that, you know, explained, and like I said, the only solution here is just write it off. Okay, if there's any group of people that are going to be hurt, like individually hurt by the write-off, right? Like let's say it's the bankers, right? You know, let's talk about the individual bankers. Well, compensate them, right? You can take care of them, all right? They don't need to get $1 trillion, right? You can compensate them enough so that they don't go broke, which they do anyway, right? In the 2008, 2010, when they bailed out the banks, right? Essentially, that's what they did. They you know, they're compensating the bankers. Okay, so that is a way to pay back individuals that would be hurt by this write-off, whether it's around the world, individuals here in the United States, whoever's going to be hurt by this write-off, you know, deal with them directly and compensate them accordingly, and get this bullshit number off the table that does not mean anything, right? Because at the current rate, we're at whatever, $37 trillion in debt now, in book debt. Well, with the interest compounding the way it is, where it's currently $1 trillion every 3 months, right? Eventually, it'll be $1 trillion every 2 months and $1 trillion every month. It won't take long before the national debt is up to $100 trillion. Eventually, it'll be $500 trillion, okay? Because as it goes up higher and higher, right, the interest is going to become more and more, okay? So you just got to write it off. You just got to get rid of it. Now, how did we get to this point, okay? So there's now like a secondary part, right? I kind of explained the problem, the solution, right? But now let's talk about a long-term fix. How do we not get into this problem again? So our monetary system actually is set up pretty good, with the exception that the government can electronically print money. The way our system is supposed to work, okay, is money is created by individuals. Money is created in the private sector by individuals and businesses when they go to borrow, right? So when you take a mortgage, right? Let's say you get a mortgage on your house for, let's say, $200,000. Okay, right? The bank, your local bank, right, electronically creates that money. Okay, the banking rules allow them to do that. Okay, so what they do is they take the deed to your house, right? You essentially give them a house, okay, and then they use that asset to electronically create the money. Okay, they do not create the interest. Okay, so here's the thing: if you get a mortgage for $200,000, let's say by the end of the term, you have to pay back $300,000. So they create the $200,000, but you got to pay back $300,000. So where's that extra $100,000 going to come from? Well, if you can imagine, suppose everybody this year, right, borrowed $200,000, everybody has to pay back $300,000. So in this system, there's never enough money in the system for the current generation to pay back the principal plus the interest. So this generation, right, this year, depends on new people coming in next year and borrowing more money, right? So we're depending on a future generation coming in, borrowing more money, borrowing, let's say, another $200,000, because now that puts more money into the system. And now those people are going to have to pay back $300,000, and this goes on and on. So it's a Ponzi scheme, right? It's not like a Ponzi scheme. It is a Ponzi scheme. There's never enough money in the system so that at any given time, the debtors can pay back the principal plus interest. And that is the reason why money has value, okay? I've covered this in a different video, right? There's never enough money in the system to pay back all of your debt. So you're like essentially always like all the people in the economy are always chasing that carrot on the stick. That's what kind of drives the economy forward and upward, right? Everybody's working to pay back this debt. There's not enough money in the system, so the economy has to keep growing in order to keep that going. Okay, and that's how this system is designed. And this way, the money system is not supposed to be controlled by the government, but it scales depending on the needs, right? So as more people come into the system, they borrow money, more money is created. So all this is supposed to be done in the private sector with people putting up real assets. You know, when you get a mortgage on your house, you give the bank your house, they create money. If you finance a car, the bank gets the title to your car, right? So they take a car, they create money for that. If you own a gold mine and you go and you mine gold, you give the bank gold, like real gold, and they use that to create money. So, because a lot of people say, oh, we need to go back to a gold-based system. First of all, unless you own a gold mine, this is not going to benefit you, right? Because you're not going to have gold to give to the bank so that they can lend you money, right? So in this system, you can put up any assets and use that to create money. And the system would work beautifully, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful system. The problem here is that the government doesn't have to put up real assets, okay? They basically have this concept of, they're gonna create money and they're gonna give themselves debt. They're essentially giving themselves an IOU, okay? So the problem here is that there's a limit to how much money you can create because you have to put up a real asset, okay? So you can't continually keep creating money because how many houses are going to be, I mean, there's a limit, right? But there's no limit to how much money the government can create because they're not putting up assets. They're just continually, creating. They got this balance sheet item, this idea of debt that they can continue to grow infinitely, okay? And the problem here is that we're using the same money, right? It'd be fine if the government was like off on its own and they had their own monetary system and it didn't interfere with us, but we're using the same monetary system. So when they create money, create debt, what they're doing is they're diluting the value of our money, right? The money that we've created. In order for this Ponzi system to work, in order for any Ponzi system to work, people have to continually come into the system of the same size. So for example, if I take out a mortgage for $200,000, right, and I got to pay back $300,000, right, I need people coming into the system of the same size as me. More people coming in, taking out mortgages for $200,000. If next year everybody's coming in and they're only taking out mortgages for, let's say, $5,000, right? That they're not creating enough money for me to be able to pay back, the interest portion of what I owe. So the people coming into the system have to be of the same size. So the problem here is that the government has become such a big part of this system that there's nobody of the same size as the government to come in and continually create more money. So they have to do it themselves. That's what's going on there. Okay? It would have been fine like back in the 1980s, right, when they were a small part of the system. It's like, yeah, they could have depended on the private sector to come in and create enough money so the government, through taxation, could pay back their debt. Where they are right now, it's not possible. But now here's something to consider, right? Now this information I'm going to give you guys is something I researched about a year ago, so the numbers have gone up a little bit. But when I looked at this, I think last summer, the total cash in the world, right? And I'm not just talking about like paper money. I'm talking about total cash that's in the bank. Basically the liquid money that's in the world is $25 trillion. Okay, $25 trillion. That's all the cash in the entire world. Because remember, all the U.S. dollar, not just cash. We're not talking about like euros and other currencies. As far as U.S. dollars, the total U.S. dollars in the entire world is $25 trillion. Okay, the total debt in the world in U.S. dollars, right? The U.S. dollar debt in the world, when I looked at it, was $75 trillion. Okay, so there's $25 trillion to pay off $75 trillion of worldwide U.S. dollar debt. Okay, so obviously you can see there's not enough cash, right, to pay off all the debt. Okay, which is essentially what I explained earlier. I explained how it works and the why. Now you can see this on a worldwide basis. There's only $25 trillion in the world to pay off a total of $75 trillion of debt. And that includes the national debt. The 35, again, when I looked at it, it was $35 trillion. That includes the $35 trillion of national debt that the U.S. government owes. Okay, so if you subtract out the 35 from the 75, right, the total debt of everybody in the world, besides the U.S. government, is $40 trillion. Okay, so excluding the government, there's $25 trillion to pay off $40 trillion of worldwide debt. That's in U.S. dollar debt. So again, there's not enough U.S. dollars to pay off that debt, and that's fine, because when it's only 25 trillion to pay off 40 trillion, the private sector can perpetuate themselves, right? It can grow, and it can it can slowly create enough money to pay off that debt. When the U.S. government is basically almost 50% of that system, right? When they alone are like $35 trillion, there's nobody big enough to come into the system and to create enough money so that the U.S. government can pay off that debt. So that's why it is absolutely impossible, right, for this national debt to ever be paid off. And it is going to continue to grow at a faster and faster rate. Just a rough guess, I would say within 10 or 15 years, it's going to be up to $100 trillion, maybe even more, maybe $200 trillion. So the only thing to do is to write it off, okay? And if you look at again, who's going to get hurt? Well, whoever those people are, basically work out a deal with them and just compensate them, okay? Or maybe it's certain countries around the world that are invested in that. Compensate them, right? Give them something, because they're never going to get back the whole thing, right? So give them back a portion so that they don't go broke, and that we can just, keep doing business. Okay, so something for you guys to think about. Let me know what you guys think. I'll talk to you all soon.